I'm here to be an all-time great.
You're now rocking with the best.
Purple and yellow, purple and yellow, purple and yellow, purple and yellow.
The Lakers repeat back-to-back titles.
Welcome to the Big Baby Jonathan Sports Podcast.
Oh, he's smoking hot.
The latest Laker news.
Another great Showtime feed.
The greatest Lakers show.
This is going to be legendary for a long time.
This is the Big Baby Jonathan Sports Podcast.
Lakers all day.
Go Lakers!
What's good, everybody? It's your boy, Big Baby Jonathan here. Welcome to Laker Talk 101 with my co-host, Jonathan Mathis. Jonathan Mathis, how's it going, man?
Hey, how you doing, Big Baby? It's always a pleasure, man. I'm doing well. Ready to talk some NBA today.
Yeah, speaking of NBA, speaking of basketball, we got former Phoenix Suns scout Antonio Williams. Antonio Williams, thank you for coming on Laker Talk 101.
Man, no, I appreciate it, man. I'm glad that both you and Jonathan both have me. It's easy to remember the name, so I appreciate it, and looking forward to having this conversation for sure.
Yeah, most definitely, man. But in today's show, we're going to talk about Zion Williamson. What does he need to do to get better in Laker bubble? Let's start by talking about the scouting department. So you used to be a former scout for the Suns. So tell us a little bit about that.
You know, it's a great job because it allows you to really see the game, and actually it's very subjective, right? So you're taking a lot of your experiences and the way that you see the game, and you're using that when you're evaluating players, deciding who you're going to draft, deciding who you're going to trade for, et cetera. So, and for me, having that experience of being in Nike basketball, and that was at the intersection of the great Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, and Kevin Durant, it provides a lot of perspective for your scouting, right? And so seeing those guys, not only seeing them up close and personal playing, but seeing them prepare for their respective seasons is something that when you're scouting, you're looking for guys that can do those things as well. And you also figure out quickly how guys aren't those three guys, right? So you have to look at some of their warts as a player and reconcile with those when you're looking at, because again, most guys aren't Kobe, KD, and LeBron, right? So you use them as a reference, but you also realize that most guys aren't them, and you're going to have to reconcile with some of their warts and draft them anyway, right? So with that being said, it was a great learning experience for me. And then also, too, coupling that with being at ESPN and scouting high school guys as well. So a lot of these guys, when they became professionals and they were going through the college ranks as well, I saw them when they were in high school when I was at ESPN. So being able to kind of put that whole pot together and make a meal is something that I felt like worked to my advantage for sure. And also the other thing, when I was scouting those high school guys when I was at ESPN, working in college basketball sports marketing when I was at Nike, you're building relationships with high school and AAU grassroots program coaches, college coaches, et cetera, and you rely on those relationships when you get to the NBA. So so for me, I guess my background was a little bit different than your traditional NBA lifer, that the only thing that they've done is worked in the NBA. Not necessarily better, just different, right? Yeah. And so I relied on those relationships and those experiences as well when I was evaluating guys, when I was sitting in that seat as a scout.
Yeah, speaking of scouting, man, so Zion Williamson, as a scout, what do you see from Zion that he needs to work on to get better?
Well, you know, one of the things that Alvin Gentry and the New Orleans Pelicans organization has done, they've done a great job with maximizing Zion as a player and maximizing his talents and his gifts. So when you watch him at Duke from a scouting perspective, he was on the floor with two things: immense talent around him and a great point guard that knew where to get him the ball in his most favorable spots, right? So, and then you look at that talent, he's on the floor with Cam Reddish and RJ Barrett, two shot fabricators as well, right? And these guys can make offense for themselves and for other people. So now you couple that with Trey Jones as a great point guard, understanding where Zion should get the ball. Then you got a great coach and Coach K, what they did was, if you watch Zion, he scored in transition, he scored on offensive rebounds, and then because he's so explosive and he's so strong, similar to what Milwaukee does with Giannis, they got Zion the ball while he was on the move. Even when he was posting up, they would run a cross screen, he would come across, then they would throw him the ball, he can just catch it and be explosive. It was always on the move because he's a little bit undersized as a power forward, right? So with that being said, and sometimes at Duke he played the 5, so he's still a little bit undersized. So you don't want him to score when the defense is set, and now you're asking him to constantly score over length and athleticism. It's one thing to do that in college. It's another thing to do that in the NBA, right? So I'm sure you guys will see when Milwaukee plays, someone to bring the ball up, and Giannis will come running straight up the floor, and they'll give him the ball. Now he's making a move on the move, right? And that's the same way New Orleans does things for Zion. So he scores in transition, offensive rebounds, and when he gets the ball on the move. And then the third thing they have, again, they have a great coach in Alvin Gentry. Same formula at Duke. And then from a personnel standpoint, he's on the floor with Brandon Ingram, probably the most improved player, right? Great scorer. Drew Holiday, J.J. Redick as a shooter, and then the other thing that's very similar to Duke, a point guard that understands passing the ball and getting your guys the ball in their most favorable spots. That's Lonzo Ball, right? So there was a play in particular where Zion rolled to the rim and Lonzo put it right on the rim. So this all plays in Zion's favor as he's learning the nuances of the NBA. So the things he needs to improve on, obviously shooting, right? That's the first thing he needs to improve on for sure, especially being undersized, because as the games get more heightened in intensity and they play against better teams, they're going to have court Zion. So they're going to force him to score over NBA level length and athleticism at the rim. So they're going to have courting, right? So in order to combat that, he's got to become a better shooter. That's the first thing, right? And then the second thing is he also, too, is very left-hand dominant off the bounce, right? Even when he starts going to his right, he's going to come back to his left. So if he's going to be an undersized 4, or when they go really small, play him at the 5 because he's so strong, he's got to become more versatile as a ball handler. And he has the capacity to do that, right? So he's going to have to do that. That's the other thing. And then also, and this happens with any rookie, and we're seeing this again, these guys are former Lakers. We're seeing this with Brandon Ingram and Lonzo Ball, right? And to a certain extent, Josh Hart. Once you get experience and once you get very confident in your work from a skill perspective, the game slows down for you, right? And then you start seeing all of these areas where you can exploit the way people are covering you, because from a skill perspective, you can do everything, right? So the game has to slow down for him. Right now, he's playing really, really fast. He's got to slow down for him. And but having said that, there's two things that he does. He plays with the right basketball character. So he always plays hard. So he's going to make a play, so he's not going to fail because he plays hard. The second thing that's underrated about him, he's got a great basketball IQ. He can pass, right? Most guys that you see that are power players, that's the only way that they can get off. They don't have the nuances of the game. LeBron and Zion are different in that regard. Most power players rely on power only. Well, Zion sees the game very well also. And most power guys don't, because all they see is tunnel vision. I'm just going to buffalo somebody. Yeah. Right? Well, he's got a great basketball IQ, sees the game very well, can bring the ball up and fabricate and initiate offense for other players, like LeBron does, you know, as a power player also. So those are the things that I see. And, of course, everybody knows the conditioning aspect, and he's already started that. But the conditioning aspect of it. And once the game slows down, it's going to be scary, man, because then he's going to learn how to back guys down and really use his strength and his body as leverage. And once he does that and he's a better shooter, it's going to be hard for everybody in the league.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Sometimes when I see Zion play, he just tries to do the bully ball spin, and he, like, his mid-range is there, 3-pointers there, but I feel like he needs to slow it down, because I see, like, he tries to go quick and spin, and then they deflect the ball out of his hands, and then he turns it over. He needs to work on that. and his weight too. He needs to get down, get LeBron size, and he'll be good. So Jonathan Mathis, what do you think about Zion Williamson? Does he need to work on?
Well, I think he definitely has potential to be a superstar in this league. He definitely has superstar talent, but I feel as if the Pelicans are treating him as though he just came off of an injury. I think you need to give him more playing time because that will help with his development in the future. And, if he's going to become a better shooter, give him more playing time. Don't limit his minutes. That's very puzzling to me that they have limited his minutes. I get it. You want to, preserve his health. You want to make sure he's in good shape and stays fit down the stretch. But you got to give him more playing time because that's the only way he'll catch on and be able to learn as a player. And he will get better in time. I just feel like he doesn't look like he did in spring training. He looks like he took a step backwards. And I think, if you're going to get better, you utilize him. You put him in offense. He has incredible playmakers around him. We've seen Brandon Ingram get a lot better. He's probably, in my opinion, the most improved player in this league right now.
I agree.
Then you look at what Lonzo Ball can do. Maybe not the best shooter in the world, but he's definitely a playmaker, and that could set up great scoring opportunities for a guy like Zion Williamson. If he gets the weight down and if he, works on his shot, he's definitely going to be a superstar in this league, and that's scary for the rest of the league.
No question. I agree. And, one of the things, Jonathan, too, when you look at guys, what they're doing is, and I totally understand this, and I can say this as a player, you have to save us from ourselves, right? And you guys know this as Laker fans. Kobe was out there shooting, his right shoulder was dislocated, and he was playing with his left hand. They probably should have sat him down, right?
Yeah.
So, because when you have a talent like this, you want to make sure, because ask Portland, and granted, Portland has done an amazing job of rebuilding on the fly, but look at their franchise. There are a couple things that happened to the Trailblazers that Damian Lillard has helped the Trailblazer fans and the NBA forget, right? Two things, Greg Oden and Brandon Roy, right? Two, and again, let's talk about Greg Oden for a little bit, because when people talk about him as a bust, I can tell you this, as not only working in this league, but just being a nerd of the NBA, when a person's body betrays them, you cannot call them a bust. Not their fault, right? That's different than you not doing the work. His body betrayed him, not his fault. Nothing he can do about that. And then you saw the years that Brandon Roy had as an incredible player, was going toward being a top 10 or 15 player in the world, and his knees gave out on him. Right. And so when you look at that, and when you're drafting, and when I'll say this, and you guys know this as Laker fans, when you win it, and you guys got 16 of those things, when you win a title, right, with the exception of, and Dirk is on the cusp of this, but with the exception of the 2011 Mavs and the 2004 Pistons, right? And it gets overblown that the 2004 Pistons weren't talented, because that's not true, right? They're like, oh, man, they did it without stars. Really? Chauncey Billups, 3rd pick in the draft. Rasheed Wallace, 4th pick in the draft, right? Ben Wallace, the best defensive player and rebounder in the league, right? Rip Hamilton, another lottery pick. Tayshaun Prince, a 1st-round pick. They were loaded, right? So I say that but referencing both of those teams, and Dirk is on the cusp of this argument. If you're going to win a title in the NBA, you have to have a guy on your roster that's in the conversation for the top 15 to 20 players of all time, right? When you win a title, you got to have a guy on your roster that's in that conversation. And most teams, you can make an argument, they have a couple guys that are on that roster that are at least in the conversation for the top 50 of all time, right? So when you have a guy that is trending toward that, or you think he has the ability to do that, as a franchise, you got to protect him at all costs, because only the Lakers, if you look at the NBA, Only the Lakers really have the luxury, because of the market that they're in, being in LA and being the marquee team in LA and what that carries worldwide. Only the Lakers have the luxury of essentially using the other teams in the NBA as farm teams, and you put in all the R&D to make sure that a player is great. And then once we see that he's great, we're going to get him. Only the Lakers can do that, right?
Yeah.
So every other team in the league, when you have a guy that you feel is of that ilk, you got to protect him at all costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the, and you got to protect these guys from themselves because they're so competitive. They want to play all the time. They'll play through anything, right?
Yeah,
And you got to protect them.
Yeah, I understand it. You know, it's not like you said, Brandon Roy and Greg Oden. If they never got injured, possibly Portland could have been winning championships because Greg Oden was talented, Brandon Roy was talented. You know, but when you say bust, like is Kwame Brown and Sam Bowie bust?
Well, Sam Bowie was also another guy that entered the NBA with foot problems, and these are foot problems in the 80s, right? And so again, a guy that it's hard to call him a bust because of that. Now, if you look at guys that don't perform up to their draft potential, let's say this: the NBA again is about, for most players, with the exceptions of the LeBrons or the ADs, those guys will be stars in whatever system with whoever the teammates are. Almost every other player, whether they're a star or a role player, they achieve that level of play partly because of the situation that they're in, right? Their situation is just as important as their talent. Well, you look at Kwame Brown. Kwame Brown was a young guy coming from rural Florida, right? Or Georgia, I'm sorry, coming through, was going to go to Florida. The momentum built, and he actually became the number one pick in the draft. So coming in, not understanding the business of the NBA and having to really figure out what that means for a young guy that's trying to figure that out, it's a tough situation for him to all of a sudden be going from there was a reason why the Wizards got the number one pick in the draft, because the year before they weren't very good, right? And so all of a sudden you go from not being very good and the organization taking you number one and living through your mistakes, right? All of a sudden you go from that to your first game on the floor being with Michael Jordan, or your second year you're playing with Michael Jordan, right? So now you go from a team that's built learning through your mistakes to playing with the greatest player of all time, right? So now there's a culture of expectations. All of those steps that you have to take from a development standpoint are now skipped, right? Because now you're trying to win now.
Yep.
And so, and so that's what happened with him. And so again, and we've talked about this, Big Baby Jonathan, before. Kobe Bryant, if you talk about making players better, if there's an aspect of Kobe's game that's underrated, it's making guys better. Kwame Brown played the best basketball of his career with Kobe Bryant, right? Remember those teams that Kobe, their 8 seeds, took them to the playoffs, should have beat the Suns in the first round. Kwame Brown was a very important piece for those teams, right?
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah, very important piece for those teams. And so for a guy that's trying to figure it out, it's probably tough to the first 2 teams you play for in your career, the Lakers, Michael in Washington, then Kobe in LA, right? So those expectations and all of those things, he probably would have been better served had he played on a team that maybe he played on a team where those expectations weren't there and they allowed him to gain a comfort level with being in the NBA, right? And so a lot of guys, when they fail or when they make it, it's because of their situations. And he was probably not the best situation for him, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Kwame Brown, to me, I see what you're talking about. He was a big part of that team with the Lakers, with the Suns. You know, he played defense. You know, he scored a basket. You know, I just sometimes when he just every time Kobe would throw him the ball, he would lose the ball, and sometimes he would get stripped down. I'm like, it happens. It's basketball. I get what you're saying. But yes, speaking of the Lakers, we're gonna dive into Lakers talk at the bubble. So what have you seen from the Lakers that you like from the first two games?
One of the things that I like for especially in the first game against the Clippers, I like the defensive effort. And you got to win the turnover battle in the first game against the Clippers. If you're going to shoot 39% from the field and win a game, you got to win the turnover battle. And they did 20-16. They turned the Clippers over 20 times. You got to win the rebounding battle. And they won it 79-68. So they were plus 11 on the glass. And that's what you have to do if you're going to shoot 39% from the field. Well, they're not shooting very well right now. And that's going to be the question that they have to answer, especially with Avery Bradley being out with how he was playing before we had the suspension in play, right? So the questions are with them, what happens from a shooting perspective and what happens from a offensive fabrication perspective when LeBron goes to the bench. And that's what happened to them when they played the Raptors, right? So Dion Waiters played well in game one against the Clippers, not as well against the Raptors, right? So having that person that can create offense when LeBron goes to the bench is the question that they're going to have to answer. And from a defensive standpoint, going back to that, one of the things that I liked as well was not only was LeBron guarding in game one, but I think they're going to have to, when he gets in the game, they should make a concerted effort to get Kyle Kuzma in the game early, because you know what he does? He defends when he scores early, right? Because especially in that Clipper game in particular, there were times where he was guarding Kawhi on an island, and he was ready for it and did a pretty good job. And so, but he was scoring early as well. So I would expect the Lakers and LeBron or whoever in particular, when Kyle comes off the bench, not only do they need to establish him to be that consistent third scorer, but you get more buy-in. He's more apt to help you defensively. He's more apt to help you on the glass if he feels like he's involved offensively. And he's not the only player in the world that's like that, right? But they have to make a concerted effort to do that. Like one of the things that the Bulls used to do under Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen teams under Phil Jackson is, if you go back and you watch them play, one of the first things they used to do, guys, the first play of the game, it was almost scripted. Like football teams script their first 15 plays. First play of the game, oftentimes they would throw the ball into Bill Cartwright, let him try and get a bucket, right? Yeah. Establish those guys, because you already know that Michael and Scottie are going to do their thing down the stretch, right? We already know LeBron and AD are going to do their thing down the stretch. Those other guys need to contribute, and they need to contribute handsomely if the Lakers are going to win this thing. And the last thing I like to say as well, these games are important for AD, right?
Yeah,
these games are very important for AD, because when you look at him, he's only played in the playoffs once, right? So these heightened atmosphere games, these games where they're playing these really good teams at the end of the season before the playoffs start, are really important, because what happened in that Clipper game, again, as the game got tighter, AD had like 3 points in the fourth quarter, right? So he's got to get used to what it feels like playing on a team that has some expectations and other teams are really locked in to beat you. He's got to get some experience. He's got to learn that on the fly, right? So this is very important to him. So those are the things that I really, really see when I'm watching them. And eventually they're going to need J.R. Smith and Markieff Morris. Those guys are going to have to make some contributions.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Antonio, the Lakers added shooting depth. They added guys who can contribute off the bench, who can be electrifying off the bench. I wanted to ask you, who is your sleeper, Dion Waiters or J.R. Smith? Who do you have, and who are you rolling with?
Well, I think if I had to pick one, I would probably say at this point it'd probably have to be Dion Waiters. But, JR, they're going to need JR, because what JR provides is not only a guy that can make shots, but JR, and so it's three things. He can make shots. He has experience in the playoffs, and in the finals. But the third thing about that is he has experience in the playoffs, in the finals, playing with LeBron. So that's a hotter microscope that you're under. That's a bigger microscope. That's a hotter lens that you're under when you're doing it and you're playing with LeBron in year 17, because LeBron is a legacy guy, right? We're talking about his legacy, and how many championships LeBron wins directly correlates with his legacy. And he may be the only guy in the NBA right now that we're speaking in terms of being a legacy guy, right? So with that being, that's currently playing. You can make an argument that KD is in that conversation as well. But LeBron is firmly in that conversation. And what I mean by being a legacy guy is, if LeBron doesn't come out of his career with multiple championships, some people can consider his career an underachievement. I don't agree with that, but he's the only player in the NBA that's like that, right? I don't think Giannis is at that level yet, where people are looking and saying, well, you know what? I don't think people look at Paul George that way. These are incredible players, but they don't look at them and say, man, if Paul George never wins a title, he's a failure. His career can be considered a failure. I don't think Paul George is in that category, right? It's only LeBron. So JR has that experience, not only that championship experience, but an experience playing next to LeBron when LeBron is probably the only legacy guy in the NBA right now. And I think both of those guys will really be if they're going to win it, they're going to have to contribute heavily. And then also, I think they're going to have to get something from Markieff, because what they'll have to do is Markieff will offer them an opportunity to, if they're playing AD at the 5, if they can get Markieff to give them some minutes at the 4, that gives them an offensive threat at the 4. Because oftentimes when they play AD at the 4 and they bring Dwight at the 5, Dwight is not as much of an offensive threat, right? Mm-hmm. So I think they're going to need Markieff, and you guys know this. When you look at teams that win championships, the stars do what the stars do. But at the same time, if you look at Golden State, for example, Andre Iguodala has a Finals MVP.
That's
right?
crazy. Yeah, that's really crazy.
So when you look at Miami and you look at some of the titles that LeBron won in Miami, Mike Miller played a pretty big role on one of those runs, right? So when you're looking at teams and you're looking at teams that win titles, it's not just the stars, it's those other people as well contributing. And they're going to need that because, quite frankly, guys, the Clippers are deeper than them, right? When the Clippers are full strength, they're deeper. And that's the team that you're going to have to combat when you're trying to make this run. And it can't just be LeBron and AD. It can't be that. When you win titles, other guys make contributions.
Yeah, most definitely. Like I'm gonna get back into what I see from the Lakers. I see that sometimes we play lackadaisical on the offensive end. We just stand around. When LeBron's in the post, they stand around. I want them to cut, because if you cut, they'll throw it to you. I want to see also Lakers when they're up like 12 or 13, they relax. I don't like when they do that, because it's when you're up big and you relax, the team can see it and come back. I want us to execute better down the stretch. AD needs to play dominant in the fourth quarter. Like you said, against Clippers, he was dominant all throughout, 1, 2, 3. Soon he came fourth on 3 points. And same with Toronto game. He wasn't as aggressive like he was against the Clippers. All the passing that he did was good, but also, too, they double-teamed AD a lot. And I noticed that AD struggles when they double-team him. Every time he gets double-teamed, turn the ball over. You know what I mean? So I just want to see Lakers get better. And I agree with you. These games are important for AD, the role players, because there'll be a situation where LeBron sits out and AD has to take over, or J.R. Smith or Kuzma. Kuzma is talented. I love his game, but I just want him to work on stop trying to emulate Kobe's moves. I understand that's your idol. Cognizant, but stop trying to do that fadeaway. It's not working. Go to something else. So Jonathan, what you think?
Yeah, I'm allergic to complacency. The Lakers tend to do that often. They take a lead, they get into a commanding lead, and then they just blow it in the end. This game is a game of full 48 minutes. You got to play the full 48 minutes. And, you'll let a lot of games get away from you like that if you don't stay consistent for a full 48 minutes. That's what the Lakers need to work on. I think if they get that down, they're a tough team to beat.
No question. You're spot on. Both of you guys are spot on. And I think part of the reason, again, it's going back to seems like a revolving door here.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why that it seems like that complacency sets in is because they'll take a lead and they'll get out, and then LeBron goes to the bench, right? And then it's, what do you do from an offensive standpoint in terms of guys creating shots for themselves and for others? And, one of the other things I would say, Dion Waiters is important as well. Answering your question, Jonathan, I would say Dion Waiters is important as well in this regard, because when they're matching up against the Clippers, one of the things that Patrick Beverley does, he works as sort of that igniter, that agitator, right? That irritant, that guy that kind of sets the temperature for the Clippers. Well, Dion Waiters can play that same role for the Lakers, right? Because he's not scared. He's not scared. And sometimes there may be some shots that he'll take that may be questionable. But when you look at what the Lakers need, I don't think you can coach that out of them, because sometimes when you have guys that are creative offensively, there's a tendency for people to try and overcoach them. Oh, man, we got to harness it. We got to bring it in. You got to sometimes let guys that are shot fabricators and shot creators, you got to let them do what they do. Because when you start trying to harness that, now instead of them being reactionary, they're thinking all the time now. Yeah. Should I take this shot? Should I not? And so you take away from them being aggressive. And the Lakers need him to be aggressive. And they need him to be fearless, especially when Patrick Beverley comes in and tries to say, and Montrezl Harrell, when they come in and try to do what they do, because those guys will try to buffalo you. Yeah. The Lakers need to answer that, right?
100%, yeah.
And they need to answer that. And Dion Waiters and J.R. Smith and Markieff Morris are the type that, man, you know what? That doesn't bother me, right? So I think that complacency that you guys speak of, yeah, a big part of it is just being complacent and taking your foot off the gas. The other part of it is when they go to their second unit, the personnel changes and LeBron's not out there, right? And so now it's, who's going to create offense for the other guys? And then to you guys' point about AD, when he gets doubled in the post, if he kicks it out to a shooter, those guys have to make those.
Yeah.
Right?
Danny Green was open a lot on Saturday, miss wide open. But that's part of the NBA. You will miss some, you
that's
make
part
some.
of it.
It's the make or miss league.
That's right. And so, they got to make them. They have to make them. If you look at, and we talked about this before, Big Baby Jonathan, man, like, and Fred VanVleet had a career high today, right? And so I can say this, Fred doesn't surprise me, because in my days at Nike, I was very high on Fred, spent a lot of time with him, wanted him in Phoenix as well. So I've, again, that advantage that I'm saying by having more than just an NBA contact with that player. But when you start talking about experience, one of the reasons why Fred VanVleet, people will say this a lot, say Memphis, if they are able to hold on to the 8th spot, let's just say that. And then they play the Lakers in the first round and say they get swept, or say it's a gentleman's sweep and they get beaten 5. And people are like, man, why would you push to get in the playoffs when you can go be in the lottery again? Why would you push to get beat in the playoffs so you can go get beat in the first round by the Lakers? Here's why. Because there's nothing better for a young player than experience. Remember, Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam played OG Anunoby when he came back. Those guys played a major role for the Raptors down the stretch, right?
Yeah.
But you know where they got that experience?
Playoffs.
When DeMar DeRozan was there and they were going to the Eastern Conference Finals and getting beat by the Cavs.
Yeah, I remember that,
OG Anunoby was guarding LeBron James on an island by himself. Yeah. So if you're guarding LeBron James on an island by yourself, there isn't anything else that you need to see in the NBA. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there isn't anything. You've seen it all. You guarding that cat by yourself, you've seen it all. Yeah. Right?
I feel like Toronto is the team that people need to watch out for, that they could get back to the finals.
No question.
They're looking like a sleeper right about now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so you get those young players, right? And those young players now, those guys in their first and second years in the NBA are playing in the Eastern Conference Finals, right?
Yeah.
And so now they make it to the finals and the stage isn't too big for them. So that's why if you're Ja Morant and Brandon Clark and Jaren Jackson Jr. and Dylan Brooks, that's why that experiencing going and playing against LeBron in the first round, we might get beaten 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But that experience is nothing better than that for a young team.
Yeah, most definitely, man. But Antonio Williams, we have like 4 minutes left on the meeting, on the time. So thank you for coming on Laker Talk 101, man. And it's always a pleasure. We'll talk soon, man.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you, Big Baby Jonathan. Appreciate you, Jonathan. Let's do this again, man. You guys be safe.
All right, you too.
Take care, man.